Hey guys, Palsteron here, and today let's talk about the newly reworked Assassin. I actually waited to make this video until the patch notes came out because I was under the impression that they would change some of the crit poison scaling on the tree, especially Perfect Agony, which right now doesn't make a lot of sense. A lot of these nodes that we're going to go over that make no sense right now, but they didn't. So yeah, let's talk about Assassin. Before we start, I think it's important to talk about Perfect Agony right here because it did not receive a change, which I think is very, very bad. So what Perfect Agony says is non-critical strikes cannot inflict ailments. However, your dot multi is overwritten by your crit multi. That means all your dot multi that you're already getting is completely worthless, but now you can scale crit multi, which usually you get more of. This has some obvious synergies, like for example, the crit multi you get right here from the elusive effect or something like Nightblade. But obviously this Ascendancy is used for more than just claw and dagger builds. However, the problem that we currently have is that the only other support for crit poison is, for example, Dire Torment or the medium cluster that has a very similar effect. And both have the wording damage over time from critical strikes, which does not work currently with Perfect Agony for whatever reason. So we have a weird like Perfect Agony theme and a crit poison theme, which just doesn't fit together. All they really had to do is make it so the dot multi and the crit multi get combined and added, and it would make the whole thing a little bit more interesting. But there are some fundamental flaws with Assassin as well, which we're going to talk about here, and that haven't really been addressed, unfortunately. And to make this clear from the get-go, I think that Assassin could be an interesting second build, but I don't personally think it's all that great as a League starter package. We got to talk about Infused Toxins, because this is the one node that used to be on the Ruthless Assassin that is now just on Assassin in general. All damage from hits can poison. A lot of people are hyped about this. In fact, I love this effect. The problem is that most people don't know why you go poison to begin with, and this kind of feeds into the whole problem with Assassin as a whole. Because going poison is kind of a decision to make, and it's not necessarily just a damage multiplier. You have to completely change your build, and now you're investing a Ascendancy point, which could also be more damage. For example, I don't know, average 25% more damage, which you're taking this node. So you're opting into it, and you're already paying a price for it. Opportunity cost, right? So what are reasons to go poison? Maybe you have a skill that is hard to scale crit for. In the past, there used to be stuff like, I don't know, Hex Blast, for example, which had 4% crit. There's a ton of 5% base crit skills. And this obviously only fits into non-crit poison. I want to make this clear. You don't necessarily have to be crit poison on Assassin. There is support. The only thing you would lose is this more damage on critical strike. And in that case, it's still like an interesting Ascendancy. You could also have mixed damage. So for example, if you have Voltaxic Burst, the skill that has half lightning, half chaos, or you have like a tri-ally weapon, stuff like that. This has gotten a lot easier over the years though, because you can now use Trinity for penetration. But basically, if you have a ton of, maybe like a cast or damage taking build, right? A ton of different sources of different damage types, you can kind of combine them all under the poison mantle. A really underrated use case of this is also Headhunter, because Headhunter has a ton of Fizz as extra LE, which usually gets wasted on a lot of poison builds. Not if you run this node though. Then you also have Wither scaling, which is an upside. However, you do lose penetration, and you can't use Chaos Pen. You can only reduce the resistances because it's a dot. So it's a little bit annoying. It's also not that easy to get Wither unless you have a very fast hitting skill. Another reason to go for Poison Assassin would be you have some sort of duration scaling. You see a lot of people going Spark or BV. Why is that? Well, the reason is you're in the perfect area for what is usually not really used for a lot of spellcasters, mainly because you have projectile speed nearby, right? You can go long shot, most likely can path down here. All the dex nodes you go through have projectile speed tattoos. So if you're Spark, that is huge. And even BV, right? Everything that is duration scaling, you're getting just passively duration from Malevolence, from Entropy. If you're taking Atrophy, some of the large clusters, you're getting around about 40 to 50% duration just by being dot. Then the obvious Nightblade Perfect Agony scaling. The problem is that there is already the high stagger, which makes it so all damage can poison. So the only real reason would be maybe to go Claw, so you get a little bit life gain on hit, but that's like, I don't know if that's actually worth it, but these kind of characters, yeah, they do scale well with it. They usually already have elusive from the get-go. So for example, the elusive node on the Assassin doesn't make much sense. And the last one, that's a big one, is stuff like greater multiple projectiles and multi-strike has very clear downsides, which says less projectile damage, which does not affect your poison. So for example, if you went poison tornado shot or something, you could get 4 additional projectiles without the downside. So that is reasons to go poison. If you have none of these reasons, most likely just going poison straight up is not really that good, right? So just being poisoned for the sake of being poisoned, not that great. So with that out of the way, also let's talk about the downsides of poison, which is you don't get any leech or very bad leech, especially if you want to use something like Deadly Ailments. You have delayed damage, which is a big deal. Lots of people think their PvP looks really good, then they get into the game and they see it's not very responsive, it takes too long to ramp up the damage. And there's also damage cap, although that is rarely relevant if you're truly damage capped. So now we can talk about Assassin. Okay, so Toxic Delivery got changed. The 100% poison duration, I'm gonna make this a little bit bigger. The 100% poison duration is still here. You need a decently fast hitting skill, but that is a very good way to scale. However, going overboard on duration usually means that your damage is too delayed and it's gonna feel kinda bad, and it only really matters on single target. In fact, in a lot of mapping scenarios, you just want to get into the pack, explode it, move on. So in that case, like it's going to take like 0.3 to 0.5 seconds of your duration. So you don't want to go overboard, and you already have Unbound Ailments as a very good support, and you have Temporal Chains. So yeah, it's a good multiplier, but it's not like crazy. Still very good. The recovery is nice. One thing they did here is they removed the 40% chance to poison, and this is a big deal, especially for spellcasters. Not only because this makes it so much easier to cap your poison chance, but also because it's global poison, which affects exploding, unlike, let's say, septic spells that you get from your medium cluster. All right, so this node overall was nerfed. You do get the 20% more damage with poisons you inflict with crit strikes, but overall, getting back the 40% poison chance, and are you actually going to be poison crit? That is the big question. And then the second node, obviously, Infused Toxins. Now, people say this is OP, it's basically Original Sin. I want to remind you that most people play Original Sin for like Strength Stacker and stuff like that, not necessarily for poison. But the problem with Assassin is less this node or, I don't know, crit or poison. It's more trying to combine both. See, a lot of the reasons to go poison on a lot of builds is actually in order to not go crit. Most of the time, you don't have enough points to ever even consider going both crit and poison unless they have insane synergy, like for example, as we talked about with Nightblade, Perfect Agony, Claws, Daggers. Especially in a world where cluster jewels are easily accessible and you can even go double medium cluster, there's never really a point where you're like, oh, I wish I had more damage nodes. And if you want to scale Perfect Agony, you truly need like 100% crit chance or as close as possible. That's the issue. And you now need to get crit up, and then the payoff you're getting is basically the dot multi, and then you have all these crit nodes not working as they are, I guess, intended. I'll give you another example. Let's say a poison spark that goes Pathfinder. Why do you go poison on spark? We already talked about like it's a good area, right? You get good projectile speed, you get some duration because you're poison, but there's also the factor that the poison version doesn't need as many damage nodes to get to a good number of damage, and after that, you just have more points for defenses. And Pathfinder is not just like a poison support. It's like, for example, Poison Prolife is not that good on Spark because it only ever prolifes the highest poison. So that's not the reason. The reason is you can also couple it with defenses. And that's where Assassin is lacking. So you have just a ton of damage nodes, but nothing really to back it up. So when I say that I don't think it's a great League starter Ascendancy, I mean that most of your defenses will just have to come from gear, and that's usually super expensive. But that's about all I got. If you know what you're doing, I think that starting a Assassin could be totally fine. Just ask yourself the question, is there a reason I'm going poison? Because I'm getting so many people who are like, should I go poison this? Should I go poison arc? And I'm just like, why? And they're just like, poison good, right? But it's a little bit deeper than that. Okay, so here is where my hatred for Assassin starts. On the bottom here, they kept Unstable Infusion basically the same. All right, so this node here is trash. Spoiler ahead, there's no more power charge scaling on Assassin. This is the only power charge related node. And there's so many different ways to get power charges on almost every build. So just to start with, bows get mana forged arrows, right? Wands have it from the mastery for free. Daggers and claws get it from a cluster notable, and spells can get it for power charge and crit. There's a little bit of a pocket in there for builds that aren't stacking power charges, they just have like 4 or 5. In that case, maybe power charge and crit is not as efficient as another support, but still, having this node here just as a raw, like 1 max power charge and like power charge generation If you compare this to, for example, Cultist, the difference is wild. I really hope they reconsider, for example, putting the crit multi per power charge at least on it. Just give it some form of scaling, because the problem is it's a pathing node for 2 other nodes that are a lot more interesting. The first one is Mystical Infusion, which has the same effect as Sandstorm Visage. Base spell critical strike chance for spells is equal to that of main hand weapon. Now, wands did just get nerfed, so if you're a wand, for example, a wand cast on crit build, or you are a spellcaster with prophecy wands, that crit is now lower. I think it went down from like 14 max to like 11.5 max or so. So that is a slight nerf, but it does not have the downside of Sandstorm Visage. Cannot deal critical strikes with attacks is not there, so you can use it on a cast on crit build, which is quite big, honestly. That is quite a good node, but once again, it kind of costs you 4 points because this node is pretty damn bad. If this node is just 50% increased crit for you, then yeah, you just took a little bit of a doozy. So in that case, it also waters down the effectiveness of this. So yeah, Mystical Infusion, interesting, but yeah, Unstable Infusion I think has to be fixed. Deathmarked is a little bit weird. All Assassin's Mark gives you at level 30 is an extra 10 crit multi. That is literally it, and a little bit of extra life gain on kill and whatnot. The one thing I like about this is it doesn't have a cooldown like Mark on hit. So technically, while you're clearing, you're always going to have the rares marked. So in something like Legion, maybe that's going to make a difference. And there's still only one enemy that can be marked, as far as I understand. You cannot really rely on the cannot bait attacks because it's only on rares and uniques. And mark skills cost no mana is kind of like whatever. So yeah, pretty rough already, because once again, it's behind Unstable Infusion, and then it also doesn't really deliver. And the last 4-pointer here is Knife in the Bag and For the Jugular. And from what people are telling me, this will work with Forbidden Flame, Forbidden Flesh, if it works similar to how Scion works. If that is possible, and you can take one and then get a Forbidden Flame, Forbidden Flesh for the other, that would always give you 100% more crit and plus 100 crit multi and call. That is a pretty good payoff if that works, and it's a really good 2-pointer. Otherwise, the only use case on Leaguestart I can see, if you don't have the Forbiddens, is more crit chance against enemies that are not on low life. So you have the first 50% of the enemy to basically stack poisons, and then once they get below that, the poison's already applied. So if you have a long poison, which is definitely going to be the case, it's going to be like 7 seconds or something for free, quote unquote, then yeah, maybe that could pay off, but I don't know if that actually plays out like that, especially against enemies with phases. Funnily enough though, I don't see any problem with you respecking this during a boss fight, so who the hell knows. Opportunistic, damage from your crits cannot be reflected. This is like the old node. They did buff the less damage taken while there are 2 rares or unique enemies. I mean, this is like, I guess like the Uber Elder node that you pick. Otherwise, it's an okay node. You click it. I don't know why this is a 4-pointer, but sure. And then we have the 2 quote-unquote filler nodes. The first one is Shadowed Blood, unaffected by damaging ailments, and then Fizz damage recouped as life. This doesn't really make much sense to me. There's obviously use cases here with like cost and damage taken and whatnot, but the unaffected by damaging ailment is quite interesting. So what you can do on Leaguestart, for example, is you can take a golden rule and apply poison to yourself. So you're reflecting back your poisons. Then you're getting a ton of Chaos Res, but that's also good because you can use Winter Weave and Ice Fang Orbit. Ice Fang Orbit, while you're poisoned, you're also chilled, which is a 10% chill. You can then scale this with stuff like Unbound Ailments and whatnot, and actually get extra effect, get that chill maybe to 30%, and that self-chill is then going to convert into more attack and movement speed, and cast speed, obviously. Now, that means you can be quite fast on Shadow, and this is pretty hard to do otherwise. In late game, there's other applications here, for example, Fulcrum, which is a little bit of a different build, but good nonetheless. Do note that unaffected by damaging ailments also affects Ignite and Bleed, and just the fact that you're immune or unaffected, which means you still have them, to Ignite, Bleed, and Poison is still decent defensively. I'm still disappointed that the Recoup is so specific. It's only physical damage, and Recoup doesn't really jive with the rest of the class. I don't really understand. I wish this was a straight up more defensive node, maybe a Fizz taken as Chaos or something, to maybe round out Assassin a little bit better. I think that could have made a huge difference. And let's talk about the last filler node, which is Mistwalker. And I think this is just a decent node. It gives you elusive on crit. You get 100% increased elusive effect and take no extra damage from crits. Now, this is a little bit awkward on poison because that will not do anything. You're already immune to crits, but you don't have to be poison on assassin, so it's still nice to have. The 100% increased elusive effect will give you a little bit of extra movement speed, a little bit of extra chance to avoid damage from hits. But what do I think assassin will actually be used for? I'm going to talk mostly about Leaguestart because later in the game, a lot more options open up. But the first one would be non-crit poison for bows. The funny part is this Ascendancy, if you use it correctly, is probably the biggest movement speed Ascendancy you can go for, even better than Deadeye. If you're doing this setup, and Winterweave and Icewing Orbit actually makes sense, and you can go self-chill, and then you also get average 30% movement speed from Mistwalker with the increased effect. So if there's any form of non-crit poison bows, then that's going to be what you're going to do. You will take Toxic Delivery, Infused Toxins, take Shadowed Blood and Mistwalker, and you're just going to kind of ignore the more damage on crits because you don't really have much to synergize with bows there. The issue is you're just as squishy as you are on Deadeye. You're missing the +2 proj, maybe the chain, so your clear is going to be slightly worse. So I don't really know if this is going to be an application. I do think crit poison claw dagger based builds could fill in here with Nightblade. They have some good claw nodes, right? You go elusive stacking, you go here, you go dagger. You guys know the gist, right? There is definitely a ton of synergy right there. And yeah, that could make a return. I don't really know what these kind of builds would look like. And you would also have to have a reason to not want to go high stagger. Because if you're going high stagger, then I don't know, like without having to go Infused Toxins, is there even enough reason to not just be Pathfinder? I think Rebuke of the Vaal is probably one of the biggest reasons to go for Assassin right now. So if you're, yeah, if Rebuke of the Vaal fits into your build, this is a absolutely crazy Leaguestart vehicle to get your build going. It has so much damage, but usually can't really be used because you can't scale all of these damage types at once. But now you can. So yeah, Rebuke of the Vaal is gonna be, you're gonna see these builds, once again, squishy as hell. Maybe Spellcasters, I personally wouldn't recommend it, especially not Poison Spark. When people show me their Poison Spark POBs, it's not just about getting this effect. I know you're saving Original Sin, I get it, but most likely when you started your Original Sin build, you also had all the other good gear, right? So I don't think you're gonna do a lot of damage, and from the pops I've seen so far, I would stay away from it. I do think it's going to be a quite interesting second build though. With that said though, why would you not just go Pathfinder? That is a question I'm asking myself. And I think the answer is there is no reason. Around about 80 to 90% of the time, whenever you're thinking about the new Assassin, and that's a little bit of an issue. One thing I will say is that Prolif, unless you're Mamba, right? Mamba Prolif is insane, don't get me wrong. But most fast-hitting poison builds, the Prolif is actually not that good because it only prolifs the highest poison. All the other ones, not really. It's noticeable, but it's a lot just like cosmetic still. But Pathfinder has way more going for it than just the 2 poison nodes. It has Nature's Adrenaline, it has Master Surgeon, you can go Petrified Blood, you can go Progenesis. Yeah, the endgame scaling is quite ridiculous. Yeah, you have to find a reason in here. As for League Starter, I will 90% to 99% not Leaguestart an Assassin, although I would like to. Even though I do like all these nodes, I just don't really see the option to get decently tanky here. And if you look at most of the good Ascendancies, they usually have both damage and defenses. As for my conclusion about Assassin, Poison and Crit are just not very synergistic right now for all the reasons I named. I think it needs a thorough redo, or they need to stop pretending like it is a thing. Maybe give back the chance to poison here and kind of make it separate, like make the crit separate from the poison on the assassin tree. I don't really see a reason why they wouldn't. But yeah, if they want to make this work, then they need to rework Perfect Agony or some of the crit nodes or nodes on the medium cluster that don't work currently with Perfect Agony. If there's no reason for you to be poisoned, most likely you shouldn't be poisoned. There's also a ton of downside. Like I said, no leech, delayed damage and whatnot. So yeah, if you have to spend 2 Ascendancy points to get poisoned and then you're like, okay, I guess I'll do something with it, most likely you should reconsider or you're going to get hard baited. And the last one is a tale as old as time. If you're Ascendancy has 0 defense, that's pretty rough. If you think of some of the best current Ascendancies in the game, think, I don't know, Elementalist, Trickster, or Slayer, they all have both damage and defenses. And the reason is, if you want a true defensive setup, that's going to cost you quite a bit more than just some damage. And overall, I think Assassin is going to be playable. If you know what you're doing, I think this is not a very new player-friendly Ascendancy overall. And I hope they reconsider some of the things, mainly give Unstable Infusion a little bit, and maybe reconsider swapping the recoup out here for some defensive extra buff. With that said though, I will be putting out some updates to my old guides, mainly talk about EA and also Forbidden Rite of Soul Sacrifice after the changes. And yeah, I will be putting out a new League starter this patch. I will most likely be playing Wander Elementalist. So yeah, look out for that. And since I still don't have a slogan, see you next time.